Framework will help to do away with undue interference, the violation of public procurement rules, or the favoring of certain private sector interests as happened during the era of state capture. The framework will also bring greater stability in the senior leadership of the public service. Whatever internal processes when it comes to the appointment of people, what you characterize as cadre deployment, just like the DA's practice of vetting candidates for employment in DA-led municipalities, which continues to happen. Whatever internal processes political parties undertake, we are clear that the merit principle must apply in public sector appointments based on legislated prescripts and in line with the minimum competency standards. We're taking steps to professionalize the public service across all spheres of government to ensure that the right people are in the right positions, that they are held accountable, and that they are empowered to provide the best possible service to the people of South Africa. To support this effort, we are undertaking skills audits in all infrastructure and service departments. These audits will help us understand where critical skills do exist in these departments to effectively deliver infrastructure and services. The National School of Government will work with other organs of the state, like the Human Sciences Research Council, to conduct these audits. The adoption and implementation of the framework gives renewed momentum to the drive that commenced with the start of this administration to build a public sector that is ethical, professional, and efficient. The framework should be welcomed by the country's public servants as an important tool for their own progression as they work on the front line to deliver to the promise of a better life for every South African. And this is how they too will be able to put our people first through the Batubele principle that is widely accepted in government service. Thank you very much. The framework will help to do away with undue interference, the violation of public procurement rules, or the favoring of certain private sector interests as happened during the era of state capture. The framework will also bring greater stability in the senior leadership of the public service. Whatever internal processes when it comes to the appointment of people, what you characterize as cadre deployment, just like the DA's practice of vetting candidates for employment in DA-led municipalities, which continues to happen. Whatever internal processes political parties undertake, we are clear that the merit principle must apply in public sector appointments based on legislated prescripts and in line with the minimum competency standards. We're taking steps to professionalize the public service across all spheres of government to ensure that the right people are in the right positions, that they are held accountable, and that they are empowered to provide the best possible service to the people of South Africa. To support this effort, we are undertaking skills audits in all infrastructure and service departments. These audits will help us understand where critical skills do exist in these departments to effectively deliver infrastructure and services. The National School of Government will work with other organs of the state, like the Human Sciences Research Council, to conduct these audits. The adoption and implementation of the framework gives renewed momentum to the drive that commenced with the start of this administration to build a public sector that is ethical, professional, and efficient. The framework should be welcomed by the country's public servants as an important tool for their own progression as they work on the front line to deliver to the promise of a better life for every South African. And this is how they too will be able to put our people first through the Batubele principle that is widely accepted in government service. Thank you very much. The framework will help to do away with undue interference, the violation of public procurement rules, or the favoring of certain private sector interests as happened during the era of state capture. The framework will also bring greater stability in the senior leadership of the public service. Whatever internal processes when it comes to the appointment of people, what you characterize as cadre deployment, just like the DA's practice of vetting candidates for employment in DA-led municipalities, which continues to happen. Whatever internal processes political parties undertake, we are clear that the merit principle must apply in public sector appointments based on legislated prescripts and in line with the minimum competency standards. We're taking steps to professionalize the public service across all spheres of government to ensure that the right people are in the right positions, that they are held accountable, and that they are empowered to provide the best possible service to the people of South Africa. To support this effort, we are undertaking skills audits in all infrastructure and service departments. These audits will help us understand where critical skills do exist in these departments to effectively deliver infrastructure and services. The National School of Government will work with other organs of the state, like the Human Sciences Research Council, to conduct these audits. The adoption and implementation of the framework gives renewed momentum to the drive that commenced with the start of this administration to build a public sector that is ethical, professional, and efficient. The framework should be welcomed by the country's public servants as an important tool for their own progression as they work on the front line to deliver to the promise of a better life for every South African. And this is how they too will be able to put our people first through the Batubele principle that is widely accepted in government service. Thank you very much.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to those who are in South Africa. Good morning to all public servants and members of the public who are joining us in this important webinar about professionalization of the public service or public sector. It's a framework that has been developed, and I'm going to show you right now how it went. But my name is Johnny Masiho Peterson from the National School of Government that has been the initiator of the professionalization framework. But today, as has been the case with other engagements, we are joined by departments that one could say are in the finance sector to come and discuss matters around how they would implement this framework on professionalization in the public sector. The process has started a while ago, and we are at the point where now we are advocating for this framework. As the president has been speaking right now, just before we started, he's talking about implementation of this framework. It's no longer about development of the framework or discussions around what the framework is all about. However, it is now about how we implement it. And the slide that I am showing, hoping it's showing to you, indicates the roadmap or the progress that we have undertaken so far. That in 2020, there was a mandate from Ministry of Public Service Administration, which includes National School of Government, DPSA, and Office of the Public Service Commission, to draft a framework on professionalization in the public sector, in a way ensuring that we give effect to the Constitution that has always had Chapter 10, that is about how public service should be value-based and principled. And in January to May of 2021, media statement was made by the minister, who then created public consultations and created a task team by August of 2021, which ensured that it's working on the framework that was drafted initially in 2020. And this task team was made up of people from the academy, and it was going to be an advisory panel for the minister. People from the academy, people from the professional bodies, people from the public sector, and therefore this created a situation where the framework became a co-produced product. So in other words, we're making it together with the public, and it's not only about public servants. And by 2022, by 2021 December, we had an extension for submission of the framework, which was then, after the consultation with various aspects, we then had a workshop to workshop this framework that was designed by these experts that were brought in. So in January of 2022, a report and recommendations were presented to Minister of Public Service Administration, presented to FOSAT, which is a forum of directors general, and other clusters, and as well as other structures that are important in the governance, like Joint Cabinet Committee. Then in 2022, October, this framework was approved by the minister and by cabinet in particular. And Portfolio Committee also noted it on the 4th of November. So this is a journey that has been taken. This is an illustration of how important this framework is, that already is a product of consultation. And it also takes into consideration the fact that members of the public and members of other sectors are quite important in shaping the professionalization of the public servants. And it is for this reason that we are now at the point where we're advocating for this framework. By we, I mean all of us. Again, now that it was co-produced, it was co-designed by everyone else, it means that all of us are playing an important role of ensuring that we indicate what role are we going to play in it. And it is for this reason that today we have Auditor General Office, and by extension, National Treasury, to make inputs and indication on how they see implementation. Like our DDG in the NSG, Dr. Maja, like saying, the time of talking is over, it's time to now implement. It is at this point that we're saying, when we engage with it, we're talking about how are we going to implement. We're no longer talking the what, but the how. Because the public of this country indeed expect us to make a change in their lives, and that change can only happen when we do our work professionally. In this regard, we will not have a situation where we've got embarrassing situations like people in Hammanskraal in Free State dying of cholera. So colleagues, we have a number of people today who will speak, and we're asking you to please put your questions on the Q&A section. There are people who are going to note them, in particular, Ms. Marusa Labushagne and Ms. Juanita Fennell. They'll be noting those questions, and there'll be a section where they will then be addressing them. But keep on checking in case they have given you a verbal responses. Then we would know that, or not the written responses, then we would know that you don't need verbal response then later. And also indicate when you are putting your question that you could just say something like at NSG, which shows that where you come from, which department are you coming from, because this helps us to also assess as to who engaged with this and what kind of questions emerged, so that as we go on with implementation, we can then improve based on the kind of questions that came from particular departments. So indicate that at AG of South Africa or AGSA, then ask your question. If you want to direct the question to this particular speaker, you can mention that, then we would know that we can direct it properly to the person who asked. So colleagues, we're at this point, therefore, that it is important to really implement this. Yesterday, the minister invited people from her portfolio and about the budget that she just presented in Parliament. It was approved. And in particular, she indicated that it is important that we have frameworks, but it's much more important that we implement them. There's no need for a policy that gathers dust without being implemented. And therefore, in this context, we are all one, from the ministry, from to cabinet, from members of the public, that we are all one, that we are saying, how do we make public service work? And part of the how is professionalization of the public servants. So let us be ready now to hear from our colleagues. And in this gathering, we have Ms. Faith Nyaka, who is the Chief Director in the National School of Government, or the NSG, Chief Director of Quality Assurance, but she was also a chair of the secretariat that supported the panel of experts who were working on this framework that I referred to earlier. And then Ms. Nyaka would then take us through the framework itself as to how it is and how it has evolved and what does it imply to all the sectors, in particular, the sectors that we are dealing with today. Thank you very much, and over to you, Ms. Nyaka.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. I'm going to, and welcome to the webinar. As Dr. Peterson has indicated, I'm going to take you through the presentation of the national framework towards the professionalization of the public sector. In terms of the first slide, it talks about the purpose of this framework. This framework was designed to create a clear vision as to where the next generation of public servants will emanate from. And you'll see through the problem statement that we have a crisis in the public sector because there is an aging cohort that is leaving the system. And the second objective, why the framework was developed, is that we want to establish a career system that is based on meritocracy and ethical disposition. And we want to make this public sector a career of choice. And our minister yesterday said, we don't want to make it a last resort when people don't get jobs anywhere and say, at least there is this one, let me just see what can I do in the public sector. We want people to join the public sector and see it as a career of choice. And we also want to devise mechanisms to address skills deficit and also deal with inappropriate staffing. And we want this framework to be seen as part of state reform to strengthen state capacity. So in terms of the objectives of the framework, there are 5 objectives that have been identified. Is to entrench a system, a dynamic system of professionalization in the public sector. All public servants, whether in the state entities or wherever, needs to be professionalized. We also want to strengthen and enable legal and policy instruments for professionalization. Where there is legislation that is going to hinder professionalization of the public sector, there are means in the framework that have been indicated where specific departments are given instructions to, are given tasks to make sure that they're going to deal with the legal instruments, align them with this framework to ensure professionalization. We want to enhance and build partnerships with higher education institutions, professional bodies, even the private sector. And we want to ensure that appointments are done and recruitment through meritocracy. And this will be in line with the NDP and the MTSF. And we also want to deal with issues of consequence management, because in the public sector, people commit irregularities and they continue business as usual. If they are fortunate, they leave the system and they join another department after leaving the other department. So we want to ensure that we create a system that is going to manage irregularities, to ensure that as public servants, we are going to ensure that we adhere to the codes of ethics and codes of conduct that are prescribed. I think the chairperson, program director, indicated that the framework was designed because it's priority 1 of the 6th administration. This framework contributes to the building of a capable, ethical, and a developmental state. And these slides are giving explanation, what do we perceive or understand by a capable state. It means we'll have the relevant human capabilities, institutional capacity, service processes, and technological platforms to be able to deliver good service to the public. An ethical state is a state which is driven by constitutional values and principles, administration of the rule of law, which is going to be led by a progressive realization of socio-economic rights and social justice as outlined in the Bill of Rights. And a developmental state, how do you see that we have developed? It's a state that will be able to meet people's needs through interventionist developmental participatory public administration. In terms of context, there's a lot of research. If you can get hold of the framework, my colleagues will also post the framework on the chat so that you can download the framework. But there's a number of legal instruments and research that has been conducted to develop the framework. The first one is Section 195 of the Constitution of South Africa, because it prescribes the basic values and principles that needs to govern the public administration. And this is the only legal document that talks about public administration, where it refers to all spheres of government, organs of state, and public enterprises. Therefore, this framework, as we are going to present, it applies to all of those, not only public service. It is extended to local government, state-owned entities. It also applies to those that are not governed by the Public Service Act, like your military, the police, the state security, correctional service, and it also includes traditional leaders and staff that are appointed into political offices and their advisors. The National Development Plan also speaks about sustainable and inclusive development, and they also emphasize key developmental interventions to enable us to create more jobs, enhance livelihood, and also the key part to build a capable state that will be able to fight corruption and enhance accountability. In its 54th conference, December 2017, the ruling party also identified 4 targeted actions that are going to be critical for us to ensure that we live in an ethical and a developmental state. The first one was the issue of dealing with political administrative interface, where we separate roles and responsibilities between the political heads and also the administration. And you'll see in the framework the proposals on how we are going to deal with this. The second part is the issue of intergovernmental systems, where there's articulation between roles of the national, provincial, and local government. And the critical issue to develop technical and specialist professional skills that are going to be appropriate for career pathing, and especially for technical specialists. Then in terms of meritocracy, we can't preach this one. We want to build a meritocratic and professional public sector that is going to serve the government of the day in a loyal manner, which means as public servants, whether government changes, we need to be public servants that are going to be able to be meritocratic and professional enough that will be able to serve any government that is going to be in power come 2024. And we also want to ensure that we retain skills and we we protect the skills and the skilled personnel against political patronage. These are some of the problem statement that the framework is trying to address. If you can see, as I've indicated, this framework applies to the whole public sector, include your local government. This is some of the literature that has come out in terms of what is happening in our country. In 2012, 19 February, the issue of lack of management experience and skills that is threatening financial sustainability of many municipalities has been released around 2012. So even now in 2022 or 23 now as we speak, we still have some problems in the local government because the issue of financial instability still exists. There's a lot of protests for poor government services. The example was taken, I think, in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape. And there's also a problem in terms of the LGC. The report was written in 2018. Also, it looked at local government, skills shortages, administrative incapacity, which impede professionalization, absence of plans and lack of monitoring, the issue of governance challenges where there's a lot of political interference, and also deficiency in the awareness of ethical issues that underpin, HR policies. There are many there's literature out there that could guide us on how to deal with professionalization. You'll see that in the local government, they've already spent 40 billion on building local government capacity. But if you can weigh the 40 billion that was spent and currently look at what is happening in local government, I don't think amongst us there's anyone who can say there's value for money. Because once you put money into place, you need to check the value. Are you getting value after what you have spent in terms of professionalizing them? Other writers have identified problems in terms of reports, in terms of these reports, that there is a disjuncture between what the skills programs that are being offered to the public servants and what is actually required in the public service. So there are many reports that we can look. The sector skills plan, it shows the skills gaps. It was released by LGCTA 2021-2022. There's also a diagnostic overview report that has been released also in 2022. It also identifies the skills gaps that are happening in terms of building capacity. And there's also a local government report that talks about the outcomes of audits for 2020-2021. Those reports, if you look at them, they tell you what is it that public servants cannot do in terms of delivery of their work. So it can help in terms of us designing programs that are going to be capable to upskill these public servants. And there's in 2021, again, the Bureau for Economic Research published new research in terms of the state of local municipalities. And also it talks about shortage of skills in terms of capacity and incompetency. It goes on and on and on. And also in 2011, there was a diagnostic overview report. This report also speaks about the crisis in reproduction of professional expertise, because the aging cohort are leaving the system with expertise and knowledge, and we've got a shortage of technical and managerial skills. We depend on outsourcing of professional and technical services. You will see the framework is outlining areas where we are having a problem, where we need to professionalize, because the government cannot keep a warm body in the office. And later they must outsource the work that I must do to somebody who's outside the public service because I lack a competency to deliver the work. So the framework, you will see, it identifies the key professions that we need to professionalize so that we can cut costs for the state. It becomes like it's a double dipping. You've got a professional that is working. However, the work that the professional is expected to do, the professional cannot deliver. They have to outsource. At executive management levels, the issue of reporting and recruitment structures have also allowed too much political interference, and it has also resulted in unnecessary turbulence, especially in senior positions. Those people are not able to keep their positions also to promote succession planning. At junior levels, there's been insufficient focus to provide stimulating career path to ensure reproduction of skills. And this is a report that was released in 2019. At the time, we are saying after 27 years, today we can say after 29 years, we lack decisive interventions to professionalize the public sector. We have seen in terms of the examples that I've indicated where there's fruitless expenditure, poor service delivery, protests, and also these are characterized by violence, and in some cases, people have lost their lives. This framework is foregrounded by three key terms. There we are looking at the profession, the discipline itself, professionalism for the individual, and also a professionalization of the sector as a whole. In terms of the profession, the discipline, there's a lot of literature that has been conducted there. We summarize in terms of that in a profession, what we expect. It means that to be professional, one will work and project himself or herself in a way that demonstrates superior levels of acquired knowledge, skills, and competencies. Also, demonstrate exemplary conduct, commit to the profession and its code of conduct. For professionalism, for an individual, what do we expect? We expect a high work ethic, and also adhere to standards and principles of your specific work discipline and context. That will also include your qualifications, your skill competencies, and values. For the sector, the framework wants to, what was the approval? That we need to subject all employees to a single dispensation of professional registration and regulation. Want to recognize all the various professional categories within our sector and subject them to registration with external and regulated professional bodies. The framework identifies the 5 pillars that we are going to professionalize the public sector. It starts from pillar 1 to pillar 5. If you can see, pillar 1 speaks to pre-entry, recruitment and selection before you even enter the public sector. In pillar 2, we are looking at induction and onboarding. Pillar 3 is your performance management after you've been appointed. And then we looking also at continuing learning and professional development, that we don't leave this public servant. Once we're appointed, we leave you and we just assess you. We need to create programs for continuing learning and also develop you. And also the last part, fifth pillar, is career progression, succession planning and management of career incidents. We also included here in the framework heads of department, which means this professionalization is not only going to look at junior level staff, it looks at level 1 up to your level 6, where your level 16, your DDGs and HODs, they must also be professionalized. In pillar 1, there are proposals on how we can professionalize the public sector. The first one that is very critical is merit-based meritocracy. We need to appoint people with the relevant skills, expertise in certain positions, actually in all positions. The second part is the issue of review of Nyukela. There's a recommendation to review Nyukela to make sure that it's fit for its purpose. Level 13 and 14 and the Nyukela for 15 and 16 now are the same. So we need to do that differentiation. Currently, the NSG is working on the review of Nyukela, and we are designing also other Nyukela programs for your middle management. Now for your DDs and ASD, they must write Nyukela before they are appointed into the public sector. Those are going to be introduced by the NSG. And they're also busy designing Nyukela for the military, the state, let me say the security cluster, and those political staff appointed into political office and their advisors. They have to go through Nyukela first. And the third part is that we want to introduce occupation-based competency assessment. You know that we currently write one, which is one size fits all. This occupation-based competency needs to be occupation-based. You see, it says occupation-based, which means if you come from a legal field, the assessment must speak to that. If it's in finance, it must deal with finance matters, because you end up appointing a person in a higher level position, but that person is not actually competent, because this assessment does not assess. And the other recommendation is that it must be used for appointment, not for development as it is done. If you fail it, they cannot appoint you into senior management positions. They want to introduce again integrity assessment for senior managers, so that we don't appoint people who are jailbirds and later when you start stealing money in the government, we are surprised. But when they start to to check your integrity. They find that you are wanting. So the DPSA is busy working on a concept paper to come up with a better way to introduce the integrity assessment. It's talking also about the review of qualifications entry into senior management. Currently, for your municipal managers, your CEO, your CEOs, and your SMS, they want level 7. The framework recommends that it should be level 8 and level 9 should be highly recommended. To align also internship programs with the orientation and training programs, review the SMS competency framework, and also the role of the Public Service Commission to ensure that there is objectivity in appointments. They must support the EAs and municipal councils to ensure that as they appoint the DDGs and the DGs and the municipal council, there are experts that sits in those panels to ensure that appointments are done properly. PSC must create a pool of technical aspects where the departments must go and source out there to ensure that you cannot appoint an IT specialist and everybody who sits in the panel does not even understand what is IT. You appoint a CFO, people who sit in the panel doesn't even understand every single term in finance. So this is going to bridge the gap to ensure that we do proper appointments. And then the other recommendation is that for local government, a representative from national provincial treasuries must be part of the panel, not observers, part of the panel, assist in the appointments, and their recommendations must be taken into consideration when they do appointments. And in terms of recruitment in the Public Service Commission, they want also to ensure that they use experts from academia to sit on those panels. And as we have indicated, we want to collaborate with higher education because currently there are complaints that as we get people coming into the public sector, these people have qualifications, but they can't do the work. So we want to make sure that we influence the design of the curriculum to ensure that it covers what it's supposed to do, so that when they come to the public sector, employees actually know also practice. The second pillar is induction and onboarding. This is the role that NSG is going to play here to make sure that there is compulsory induction for prospective public servants. The framework, the approved proposal here is that we need to do induction immediately after appointment or within the 90 days of appointment, because we have experienced problems that people spend a year in the public service without even understanding who, especially those who come from outside, in terms of the roles. People end up, committing misconduct because they don't understand. Things are different out there. The issue of compulsory reorientation program for serving public servants, those who have been in the system for long, we are saying go back to the simulator, you need to be reorientated so that we are aligned, because your experience, you are not professionalized, you don't belong to a professional body since we are appointed in 19, whatever, you think what we are doing is still acceptable. Things are changing, legislation is changing, you need to adapt also. There's issues of coaching and mentoring at senior level, especially for specialists and technical positions. That needs to be done within the first 6 months of appointment. The DPSA is working on the program that needs to be done, and actually they're mentoring, managers into the public sector. And then who must participate? I've indicated this, it includes the whole system. It doesn't exclude anyone. And in terms of pillar 3 for performance management, the DPSA needs to review performance management system for all of us, including for HODs and DDGs. That one of DDGs and HODs, they're going to link their performance to that of the institution, and they're going to introduce independent triggers to ensure that they exit non-performing heads of departments, and they need to improve the competence of politicians so that they can be able to manage the performance of these heads, and also address systemic challenges that result in instability and poor relationships between executive authorities and HODs. The DPME also needs to review institutional planning and performance management to ensure that there is alignment across the whole system. And the review of performance management system by DPSA for PMDS tools, introduce consequence management for non-compliance, align performance management with professional body association registration, The Public Service Commission also here is given a task to ensure that they become part of the evaluation of our HODs to strengthen objectivity and to introduce an approach that will ensure that their performance is linked to that of an institution. You can't be highly performing, but your department is underperforming, AG is having serious audit findings, and then you are given a good performance score. There should be that alignment. And it's not only for HODs, it's coming also for senior managers. And in terms of Pillar 4, this is the very critical slide, and I think for the people who are attending here. In terms of the framework, they've identified the key occupations that we must professionalize. We are not saying other professions are not important, but these ones are key that are on the highest list that we need to professionalize. ICT and HR, the task is given to DPSA and GCOCTA. National Treasury, they need to professionalize the finance function plus the SCM. And the SCM one is long overdue because there was a cabinet resolution in 2014. And the DPME needs to professionalize policy and planning occupation and also establish a similar council like the one for SCM. Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, the legal profession. The AGSA is also given a task to make sure that the audit and risk profession is also professionalized. And CBE and Department of Public Works for the built environment. The reason for professionalization here is that some of the employees here are earning OSD. However, when we are supposed to get professional work done, we outsource. So therefore, the issue of professionalizing and ensuring that these professionals are registered with professional body is very critical in the public sector, so that we can ensure that we appoint people who are highly skilled, qualified. And remember, there's a difference between a qualification and also your professional designation. Those are two things. Your professional designation will make you to know how to do your work. Your qualification will make you to be knowledgeable and have that piece of paper. So that license to practice, we want to push it in the public sector. We want to work with the various professional bodies, the statutory professional bodies that exist. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. And the non-statutory professional bodies that are recognized by SAQA to ensure that they support the government in professionalizing. However, we want to work with the Department of Higher Education and SAQA to ensure that we assess professional bodies' representativity and transformation, because we don't want to put our public servants into trouble. So we want to make sure that they do have the requirements that we need as the public sector. The last one is for career progression. It's Pillar 5. There's issues that are very critical for I think it's a continuation of Pillar 4 actually. The NSG need to determine appropriate training and learning pathways to assist in professionalizing these categories of employees, including the CFOs and the finance staff that are here today. And in professionalizing the finance staff, we have extracted this. And SCM, Treasury needs to amend regulation with regard to minimum competency level requirements for prospective employees in public finance or SCM in the public sector. They need to ensure that they've got relevant years of experience in public finance management or SCM, especially people who enter into senior management. And these people should be licensed to practice in this space by relevant professional bodies or council. So that the recommendation for amendment is to make sure that you appoint people who are licensed to practice, who've got professional designations to practice the work that they are applying for. And for also appointment for CFOs into SMS, level 13 and 14, and equivalent, a minimum qualification should be at least NQF level 8. For SMS, level 15, and also it's 8, but level 9 will be highly recommended. For local government, senior managers at local government must also comply. Their CFOs must also have level 8, including the head of SCM. Pillar 5 is our last pillar. Cabinet resolved that our minister, the DG in the presidency will be the head of public administration. In provinces, this function is designated to the Director General in the office of the Premier. Their work will be to assist the president and the premiers to manage career incidents of HODs and to serve as mediation mechanism. The tenure of HODs, the framework proposed that these HODs and municipal managers and DGs should be appointed for a period of 10 years. However, this will be subjected to a rigorous process of recruitment and selection, training and development, and also their performance needs to be managed, and there should be consequence management for non-performance so that they can exit the system if they don't deliver. It's not a 10 years straight forward. The revolving door policy, it will provide for the movement of identified public servants between the public sector, academia, vice versa. And this, we were warned that we need to ensure that we manage conflict of interest, like those who are working in treasury and other key departments of finance. You cannot do revolving door policy with the private sector. They said that policy needs to be clear. The DPSA must ensure that you don't participate because you will be conflicted. And there's also the need for review of RPL, work with SAQA to ensure that we utilize it for recruitment in the public sector. And we also need to determine the RPL assessment center to support public servants who wants to apply for RPL. Here it gives the lead departments who must adopt and implement the framework. SALGA already adopted it. The legislative sector must adopt state-owned entities who are working with the Department of Public Enterprise and its shareholder departments for the adoption. And the lead departments, as I've indicated, we have seen them in the slide that I've presented in terms of the whatever, even HGSA is a lead department here. National Treasury is a lead department, the NSG, and others that must ensure that are given responsibilities to professionalize. Colleagues, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nyaka, for making us aware that the framework is about the whole of the public sector, including local government. And it's also developmental in nature for meritocracy. When we talk about consequence management, they come in the end. In the beginning, the aspects about how developmental we can be within the public sector. And the fact that the framework is actually building on what is existing. There are other developments that have happened in the past since '94 that are good that we are building on. The whole aspect of integrity management, ethics training and developments, and the whole aspect of disclosure of assets, and the intention to also to do lifestyle audits. So all these are quite important, and what the framework is building on them. So people should not say, but if you were trying to be professional now, what have you been before? We have been. We are just improving in this regard. Particularly also in the issue of political administrative interface. It's important that political representatives who are politicians and public servants know their roles, interface properly for the sake of service delivery. We shouldn't hear about unsavory relationships existing between the two. So hence the importance of political administrative interface. One thing that happened before that we're building on is the fact that at some point, Cabinet is the one that started to approve or to appoint heads of departments. There was one way of trying to manage political administrative interface so that HODs do not exist to serve a particular minister, but to serve the government and cabinet in particular. But otherwise, for those of you who are public servants here, we will not ask you a question as to what are the 5 pillars. We will ask you as to what is your role within the 5 pillars. So it's quite a critical question for yourself. Don't be like a churchgoer who sits there and when he hears the message from the minister or the preacher, that person concludes that the message is for the enemies. No, that message is for you who is sitting there in church. That message is for you to grow your faith and to also make sure that you relate very well with other people in the world. And so let's not be the churchgoers who think the message is for the enemies. We're now moving on to the presentation by Auditor General of South Africa, and it is represented by able officials here. We have Ms. Zahira Ravat and Mr. Adil Blow. Ms. Zahira Ravat is a senior manager in the Technical Audit Support Unit at the AGSA, Auditor General, who is responsible for governance and controls. Mr. Adil Blow is a senior audit manager for the Western Cape region, joined the Auditor General as a trainee auditor in 2004, and was promoted to senior manager in 2010. There's evidence, colleagues, that there's career progression in public service. Over the years, his portfolio included a number of municipalities across the Western Cape as well as the provincial departments and public entities. Over to you, colleagues. I don't know who is starting. Thank you. Please unmute, Mr. Adil.
Apologies. So thank you for that introduction, Dr. Peterson. The purpose of our presentation today is to take you through the principles of the submission of the quality of the financial statements and those underpinning it. Can we go to the next slide, please? So at the Auditor General, we have a mission, and our mission is the Auditor General of the South Africa has a constitutional mandate as a supreme audit institution. It exists to strengthen our country's democracy, enabling oversight, accountability, and governance in the public sector through auditing, thereby building public confidence. Our vision is to be recognized by all our stakeholders as a relevant supreme audit institution that enhances public sector accountability. And I hope that resonates with the audience. Then this slide depicts what we call the accountability ecosystem. And what we're saying here is that every role player in government has a specific role to play. And when those role players play their role effectively, it also allows us, the Auditor General, to influence, give insight and enforcement through our regulatory processes to allow for active citizenry. Those citizens are then able to participate through the public participation process and through the electoral process to ensure that our country is run in an effective manner and an efficient manner. And then if we look at this in the context of the financial statements, so to the left, we've got the officials and senior management who are primarily responsible for compiling those financial statements. We've got the accounting officer or the accounting authority who's got that accountability for the financial statements. And he or she is supported by the audit committee and the internal audit, ensuring that those controls that have been put in place are effective throughout the year to provide credible information, to enable that report to go to the executive authority, where the executive leaderships can take stock of what was the progress through the year, and then also enable our treasuries and departments of cooperative governance to ensure that, or at least to evaluate whether any support is needed to those departments or entities, and also allow oversight to take place in the provincial legislature through that process. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So in the 21-22 financial reporting year, we found that looking at both cycles, both MFMA and PFMA and MFMA, approximately more than 50% of the financial statements submitted for audit contained material misstatements. So that's more than half of the financial statements submitted were of poor quality for auditing. This means that if we had not identified those misstatements in the financial statements and given the auditees a chance to correct them, only 48% of the auditees would have completed their audits with unqualified opinions, compared to the 78% that ultimately received this outcome. But just to reflect on the 78%, I think even the 78% is still a remarkable achievement, looking at where we've come from over the past. If you've been following in the last 10 years or so, this is still an improvement in terms of the 78% of the country's financial statements being unqualified. ultimately at the end of the day. We can move to the next slide. So what were those reasons for the adjustments? So some of those adjustments were as a result of asset impairments that were identified but were not taken into account in the financial statements. And those impairments were on property, plant and equipment and receivables. Then some of them were also in relation to the budget comparison figures that are not aligned to the final approved budget. Reasons for variances were also not pinpointing root causes. Then the provisions and accruals and previous financial reporting periods are not reversed prior to journalizing and making new provisions. So often at the end of the financial year, when we're preparing the financial statements, we need to raise provisions and we need to raise accruals. And these are, and when we get into the new financial year, these often need to be reversed. Because we've got a running trial balance for the new financial year. So what we're saying here as part of the AFS preparation and roll forward from the previous year, closing balances need to remain as is, which requires journal entries to reverse provisions or accruals before journalizing new ones in the financial year. Then completeness of accruals and payables. We find that payables and accruals are often incomplete due to schedules not being updated. Then completeness of commitments. Commitment schedules are often incomplete and do not consider, for example, tenders awarded close to the year end, as well as balances remaining from existing projects that are still ongoing. Then changes in accounting policies and errors. This is also something where we find that the completeness of the disclosures for changes in accounting policies and prior period errors are not complete. A check of the AFS to the prior year, often preparers don't use a checklist for disclosure, but rely on template financial statements. And often you miss those changes in the accounting standards, or if an event occurred that did not occur in the previous year, you'll miss that event. Then depreciation of assets, no consideration of assets held at or close to zero, requiring possible revision of useful lives. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Then the top 10 qualification areas and assertions included accounting policies, contingent liabilities and commitments, expenditure, inventory, irregular expenditure, other current assets, payables and accruals, property, plant and equipment, and then revenue from exchange transactions. And we can see, I mean, when we're looking at what occurred, there were a number of reasons for this, ranging from existence of assets and inventory to occurrence of irregular expenditure, completeness of commitments, and so forth. We can go to the next slide. So what are the tips for producing quality financial statements? What we're saying is, firstly, the controls need to be in place at year-end to ensure quality financial statements. And what are those controls? Ensure that there's an AFS preparation process that commences as early as possible after year-end. Then the AFS should be prepared following an established preparation process that outlines clear timelines and responsibilities and ensures that there's sufficient time for reviews to take place by all the relevant role players. There should also be a conduct of independent spot checks on the information in the AFS and compare it to the underlying records like the asset registers and trial balances, etc. And then undue reliance should not be placed on the external audit process for identifying misstatements in the AFS. So what does a quality assurance process over the AFS before submission for audit entail? We're saying that there should be an established quality process that allows for timely reviews by the finance team, the CFO, internal audit, the audit committee, and the accounting officer. The CFO should review the AFS and then re-review it to ensure that issues identified are addressed before the next level reviews. Then all other reviewers should also do a re-review to ensure that issues identified are addressed. So if you listen carefully, when Santa Claus is coming to town, he checks his list twice. The review process should specifically focus on the following areas where the qualifications were identified in the prior year, areas where they were complex or complexities or that required significant judgments or estimation. Areas that are impacted also by the first time implementation of new accounting standards. So it's always important to be up to date with changes in accounting standards as well, and keep an eye on that process within the profession. We can move to the next slide. So tips for producing quality financial statements. Just to elaborate on them, key considerations to keep in mind: the appropriate application of the principle of materiality. You don't want to clutter your financial statements with unnecessary information that is not pertinent to decision making. And then I think what's important is also setting a materiality amount where you would combine your different account balances and transactions for disclosure. Then collaboration across the organization. I think it's important to understand that the preparation of financial statements is not just the responsibility of the accounting officer and the finance unit. It is everyone's responsibility. So collating information provided by different departments within the organization after deciding how best to report through the involvement of all the appropriate experts is crucial in producing high quality, credible, and understanding financial statements. So those things like projects in progress, where you may need the assistance of an engineer, where you're providing, for example, for the provision of landfill sites, etc., to have those experts, whether they are in your organization or consider whether you need to bring other experts in to do those valuation exercises, for example. Then encouraging and monitoring of timely reporting. So relevant, credible, timely reporting will aid decision making to better understand the consequences of the decisions and take necessary action where required. So one of the reasons you can see we're also driving this is because when we go through the financial statements process and the Auditor General puts their stamp on it legislatively, it's between 5 and 6 months after that the information is made public. And if you're making decisions on a set of financial statements, do you really want to only be able to know that information is credible 6 months after the fact? You'd want that information as close as possible to the financial year end to be credible. So also understanding that preparing the financial statements is more than just a compliance exercise. There's a need to move away from viewing preparation as compliance and think about the purpose that the financial statements are to serve. While it's true that they serve multiple users, simpler, more precise entity-specific information will also be helpful to all users. Financial preparation and auditing should start well before the legislative reporting and auditing deadlines. This will provide the space for a key part of the preparation, which is the ongoing consideration of how the components can provide more useful information and be useful to the users. Then the financial statement as a tool to enable accountability. There's also something to bear in mind. It enables accountability. Accounting is the process of integrating information in a way that enables scrutiny to hold others accountable. It's important to think beyond the debits and credits alone and rather look at the broader impact and the on the societal landscape. Then accounting, reporting, providing relevant, reliable information to Parliament, etc. And hold employees accountable. Then high quality financial statements and performance reports and annual reports accompanied by independent audit reports are key to enable accountability. We can move to the next slide. So this brings us then to the preparation of an audit file. So what do you need for the preparation of an audit file? So ideally, the preparation of an audit file should contain all the balances, classes of transactions, and disclosure notes that are supported by the necessary schedules, the listing, the registers, obviously as appropriate. And then there should also be an appropriate preparer and reviewer process of this audit file throughout the year to ensure that the data in the supported listings are valid and they are accurate. Because this file is also dependent on the producers of this information. The audit file can be in an electronic format, and the folder system should be aligned to the notes and disclosures and annexures. So this is just saying that the referencing should be aligned to the financial statements. So when we go to note 1 in the financial statements, we open the folder for note 1, all that information that's required for the auditor to check note 1 is there. Then supporting listings in Excel also can be easily recalculated, and the arithmetical accuracy can be confirmed. So as an example, let's take the capital commitments note. We'd expect there to be a list of all schedules to projects in progress with the relevant contract number, the name, the contract amount, and expenditure to date at year end, the calculation of the commitment left on the contract, calculation of the totals as included in the financial statements, and then further support may include electronic copies of contracts for easy confirmation of the contract totals. Then latest expenditure schedules confirm the expenditure to date. So that's just an example of how a file can be set up. And then the above process would enable obviously easy review between the review of the detail, the time between the AFS and the supporting schedules. Then management should also then apply judgment to the amount of detail required, but also the availability of that detail at the end of the day. Then if the process has controls built in, which is recommended, then spot checks should suffice. But if you know there are no controls built in, or that the controls are not necessarily sufficient as you would like, then more detailed checks may be appropriate to confirm the accuracy and the completeness of those schedules. Checklist must have references to supporting documents. So often we find that when we open an audit file, there is a checklist that's completed, and the checklist will say that the document is included in the file. But when we go look for the schedule, it's actually not there. So the checklist should also ideally be checked. And then journal entries and adjusting journal entries should also have supporting documentation. So those necessary schedules should be there. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague who will take us further. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Adil, for that deep dive as to what the audit adjustments entail and the tips of the finance teams on how to avoid those errors and produce quality financial statements. I think I'm going to move into, the role of a number of the role players, especially internal audit and audit committee. Through our audits over the years and in previous general reports, we've highlighted the challenges with respect to the skills and capacity in the finance units at the auditees, which results in a lack of accountability, transgression of legislation, and poor performance. Ultimately, these challenges have a very negative impact on the lived experiences of our citizens. So accounting officers, senior managers, internal auditors, audit committee all have a role to play in the preparation as well as the finalization of the financial statements. And so the skills and the competence of all these role players needs to be enhanced, increase the quality of these reports, and consequently, the performance of the auditees. At this stage, you will appreciate that all of these role players in the accountability ecosystem that Adil spoke about have got a significant function to play in ensuring the successful implementation of the professionalization framework. Accounting officers, senior managers, and internal audit need to be professionalized. They also have a further role to play in ensuring that employees that report to them are professionalized. Because the concept of working together to strengthen accountability calls on all the role players to work together and positively influence their areas of responsibility towards better management of public resources and service delivery. While the role players have different defined roles, their collective purpose, is always going to be to promote good governance through contributions to transparency, accountability, and good performance over the use of public resources. So, in addition, all assurance providers have a distinct role to play in the accountability ecosystem, and they need to ensure that opportunities are not lost due to inadequate coordination amongst them. Internal auditors have a critical role in supporting the accounting officers and authorities to execute their duties by providing independent assurance on internal controls, financial information, risk management, performance management, as well as compliance with legislation. Audit committees need to advise accounting officers and accounting authorities, senior management, and executive authorities on matters relating to financial and performance management governance. So if we move on to the next slide, we are very fortunate to have good legislation in place to ensure that internal audit functions are established at all auditees with a direct link to, very competent audit committees. And these audit committees, as well as internal audit, are typically very highly skilled, in terms of the functions that they perform. And audit committees, with the members who are normally members of professional bodies and who have like a wealth of skills and competence in a number of areas, are able to then provide the required oversight to the internal auditors. The legislation addresses that internal controls must be in place, that internal auditors must adhere to the IIA standards, and a little later on we'll highlight which aspects of those standards can be of tremendous benefit in ensuring quality financial statements that are produced. The legislation also addresses the reporting lines of internal audit to the accounting officer, and also the need for the internal audit to be independent. The Treasury regulations are clear that internal audit must, and I will say that again, they must assist the accounting officer in maintaining effective controls. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. When we, next slide. Thank you. When we consider to audit committees, an audit committee is an independent committee that's constituted to review the control, governance, and risk management within the institution. The audit committee chair must be independent, and the audit committee must review the effectiveness of the internal control systems, the risk areas of the institution's operations to be covered in the scope of internal and external audits, the adequacy, reliability, and accuracy of the financial information provided to management and other users of such information, any accounting and auditing concerns identified as a result of internal and external audits, the institution's compliance with legal and regulatory provisions. An audit committee must report and make recommendations to the accounting officer, but I must highlight that the accounting officer retains responsibility for implementing those recommendations. If we are able to move on to the next slide, please. So we can see, based on the establishment and the defined roles of internal audit and audit committees, that there are many benefits that can be derived from the effective use of these functions by our auditees. Remember, they provide an independent view of the effectiveness of the auditee controls and processes. I must say, this is a very important but, is that the value that can be derived must be supported by the overall control environments that are created by the accounting officers and the accounting authorities. Internal audit and audit committees must have the capacity and the resources to monitor the implementation of plans to address previously reported findings from internal audit as well as external audit. And management must consider and audit committee activities. If we move on to the next slide, please. When we touched on the legislative requirements earlier on, we noted that internal audit must adhere to the IIA standards. So if the following aspects of the standards are adhered to, and if the internal audit functions are given the required resources and capacity to do these, then there are likely to be significant contributions made to the financial reporting processes. So internal auditors must be independent and objective, and they need to be able to audit financial management processes without management interference. Their planning needs to be done in an objective manner, which can be confirmed with management, but not directed by management. They must be allowed to form risk-based audit plans, which are approved by the audit committee, which is also independent. And if there are changes to the plans during the year, these must be on the basis of risks having been identified, additional to those that informed the original plans, and changes to those plans must also be approved by the audit committee. The next step, based on audits that are planned, is that internal audit needs to ensure that they have the right skills, competence, and capacity to finish those audit plans. During the year, as the audits are executed as planned, internal audit must report on each audit to the audit committee. And we as the AGSA will also appreciate receiving copies of those reports. Internal audit must report on progress made against audit plans for the year to the audit committee as well. A very important component of the reporting from internal audit to audit committees must be the report on the follow-up and implementation of recommendations made in prior years due to internal and external audit findings having been raised. This body of information, which is available, is usually an untapped resource for finance teams to go and use these weaknesses identified and fix them. This is very likely to go a long way in improving the financial reporting processes and ultimately the quality of the financial statements that are submitted for audit. On the next slide, please, we will then just reiterate that internal audit and audit committees are essential and valuable role players in the accountability ecosystem, as they are a big investment for auditees. They are highly skilled professionals with the right competence to address matters that concern the internal controls at auditees. Coordination of the finance team, which is made up of senior managers, CFO, and then with internal audit and audit committees must be adequate throughout the year to extract the value from these assurance providers. And with that, I will say thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, colleagues from the Auditor General's Office. Excellent presentation indeed, details around how auditing happens. I learned one word there, or one concept called accountability ecosystem, which means that the auditing system is part of the accountability system. So in other departments like ours, we should not see you as police. We should actually see you as partners in ensuring that we are accountable. Accountability being an important part of professionalization. So thanks a lot for the presentation. And we will now move to the next presentation by National Treasury, represented by Mr. Gershon Sibinda. He has been with the National Treasury for 15 years. He is currently the Director of Municipal Finance Management Capacity Building and Training, responsible for overseeing the implementation of the Municipal Finance Management Training, Internship Program, and Municipal Regulations on minimum competency levels. Both programs are funded through the Division of Revenue, Financial Management Grant Allocations, but prior to this career stint, he has been a university lecturer in economics. He has spearheaded several National Treasury projects for local government covering budget and Treasury Office structural review, amendment of the minimum competency levels, support to Department of Cooperative Governance on the writing of the conditions of appointment and service for senior managers, MFMA circulars, consequence management and accountability framework, and other donor-funded programs for local government, among others. He's a teacher by profession, an economist by training, and a local government financial education and training development expert. He has ensured that both the internship program and the minimum competency levels are institutionalized within municipal processes. He's an LG CETA verifier, that is the local government CETA, for the regulated qualifications, and he has facilitated the rewriting of the 2 regulated qualifications as occupational qualifications with QCTO, which is Quality Council of Trades and Occupations. Thanks a lot, colleagues, and let us enjoy the presentation by Mr. Sibinda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues and attendees. Thank you for the beautiful introduction, Dr. Peterson. Colleagues, I think the National School of Government and AGSA has done a very beautiful job in terms of what I'm going to present. So my presentation is going to be very short, but it's going to be a little bit biased now towards answering key questions raised by the National School of Government. Maybe, if possible, also support some other sector departments if they're attending this particular webinar with respect to how they can craft their implementation plans to give effect to the professionalization framework. And perhaps, as colleagues should know, there's the broader and closer collaboration between the works of the sector departments. What we do as the National Treasury necessarily gives credence to the work of the AGSA, gives credence to the work of the COCTAS of this world and other sector departments, including provincial treasuries and municipalities. Why am I raising that? I'm trying to bring context now for the benefit of the other colleagues perhaps who are not familiar with these dynamics, that if you look into the enabling legislation that falls within National Treasury, I'm only going to talk about 2, both the PFMA and MFMA. Necessarily, we must engage extensively with the sector departments, including the Chapter 9 institution that I've just mentioned, to make sure that there are synergies with respect to how we undertake our responsibilities, but also ensure that we sing from the same hymn book. Why is that necessary? So that at least we're able to be relevant to our clients and we do not contradict each other. And remember, colleagues, this is still one state. irrespective of the fact that we have 3 spheres of government as enshrined within the Constitution. So, yeah, next slide, please, Kulsam. I'm wanting to, I've clicked something and now I have a pen on my screen. I don't know how to manage that, but it's fine. Colleagues, with your permission, National School of Government, and without running the risk of contradicting you, I'm wanting to allay the inherent fears that we're now seeing within the sector with respect to this framework. That does this mean now we have to start things from scratch? Are we supposed to do things differently? Are we supposed now to start initiating or bringing new programs into place to give effect to this particular framework? And I'm going to impress on you, colleagues, that professionalization has always been existent. It has always been founded within the legislative framework. In terms of implementation, perhaps that's something that we can discuss the whole day. But perhaps it's only now that, by now, I mean, since the draft regulations were issued by the DPSA and the work was undertaken by the relevant task team members as set by the Minister of DPSA, Minister of Public Service Administration, the project led by the National School of Government, that perhaps government now is of the view that professionalization must now pick up pace or pick up momentum, if you like. But I'm wanting to impress on you that it has always been inherent within the legislative frameworks, one way or the other, in terms of the prescripts, in terms of what needs to be done. If we can agree that professionalization is a function of, meaning that dependencies, there are many variables that talk to professionalization, as summarized by National School of Government. It talks to issues of competencies. What are competencies? The knowledge, the skills, the attributes. It talks to issues of systems of delegations. If there are systems of delegations within institutions of government, then it means government continues to deliver on its service delivery imperatives. Things do not get stuck because CFOs are not there. Things do not get stuck because senior managers or MMs are not there. But there's always continuity. CSA's role is to continue providing the public goods irrespective of whether it's day or night. You can look into all the sector departments, life continues, and it's imperative that CSA's capabilities be upheld in that particular format. And in so doing, colleagues, I'm also wanting to impress on you that the biggest asset that government has is actually its human capital. You can define it anyhow you like. It's us, public servants, people who are skilled, knowledgeable, understand the attributes required of public servants, people who are committed, people who are loyal to government of the day. That's the human capital that I'm talking about. Move the human capital out of this whole picture and CSA literally collapses. Government collapses, nothing moves. And the rationale behind this professionalization framework is wanting now to elevate the importance of professionalism, number one, but also ensure that we keep the momentum that is needed to make sure that people excel in what they do and the citizenry get the value that is expected of them. It's there within the Constitution, Section 154. It's there within the MFMA, Section 34, 83, 107, and 119. Colleagues can read that at their own leisure time. It's provided for within the subordinate legislation, also within the PFMA, Section 62D. Then NDP is grounded on the professionalization framework, and I'll put that in inverted commas, to say, by and large, there are dependencies here to give effect or to realize the aspirations as contained within the National Development Plan. Necessarily, you need a human capital that is committed, competent, and understand the role of CSA as government, if you like, in terms of its responsibility as enshrined within the Constitution, Schedule 4, Part B, Schedule 5, Part B, Constitutional Service Delivery Imperatives. And there are also government 7 priorities that perhaps colleagues can also look into. So there are other subordinate legislation on the financial management, such as Division of Revenue Act, that talk to issues of capacity building and many other related issues. Why am I emphasizing this, Chairperson? I'm wanting to allay the fears that perhaps we need to start new things. No, it's a case of increasing the pace, increasing the momentum, and being visible now and being proactive with respect to how then we elevate the status of professionalization or professionalism, if you like, and make sure that our people are able to appreciate that government is geared for service delivery and the aspirations of the citizens. Next slide, please. So these are the 7 priorities that the National School of Government has talked to. What I'm going to impress on you now. So these are the 7 priorities. And however we look at them, colleagues, they touch on the issues of professionalization. Whether it's the issues of building a capable and ethical and developmental state, that's an issue of professionalization. The same applies to priority number 2, economic transformation and job creation. Economic transformation and job creation comes back to us, public servants, in terms of how do we make sure that CESA is able to realize this particular priority? What are the initiatives that we put into place? What is the data that is coming to us? How do we communicate? How do we share knowledge? How do we make sure that people are committed in terms of the signed performance agreements? How do we ensure that we strengthen the implementation of the performance management development system to realize that all these 7 priorities of government are realized? However you look at them vis-a-vis all the sector departments, it then impresses on you that everybody has a role to play in this regard. And they're all aligned to the medium-term strategic framework, which is a 5-year planning trajectory of government of the day. Next slide, please. So now I'm zooming into the National Treasury role with respect to implementing those, the professionalization framework. So as you should know, each and every sector department will have its strategic plan. We have ours, 2021 to 2025. It has been ratified by Parliament. And out of that, we're able to design the annual performance plans that compels us, our planning implementation, to be performance-based. So when you come to divisional role, then we have what we call operational plans, also linked to annual performance plans. Next slide, please. Now, I think now we will need to extend, if possible, Kusam, can you just expand that a little bit? So if maybe I can just explain a row or 2, just to impress on colleagues how we've done ours. And then perhaps this could be lessons learned and we can take this work forward. This is the implementation plan now, because my best guess is that now that the actual reviewed guide professionalization regulations are en route to Parliament. At some point, we're going to be required as sector departments, as entities of government, to report on how we are implementing this particular reform agenda. So we've covered that in line with the pillars that Kusam has already highlighted. Do you want to expand that maybe in terms of, I don't know, zooming out maybe, maybe zoom out. Maybe zoom out. Let's try zoom out. I just want to stick to 1 or 2 as an example, so that whoever is interested in perhaps designing theirs, then at least they're able to see how these things are done. Maybe we need to try zoom out. So there are those 4 pillars. Pillar 1 talks to recruitment and selection. The second one talks to induction and onboarding. And the third one talks to, let me minimize my camera. Okay, can you please just scroll up, Kusam? Please scroll up. Let's just deal with the first one. So now, this example says, remember, colleagues, I've talked about APPs, annual performance plans as designed by National Treasury, and each and every chief directorate would have its operational plan. And I'm wanting to also impress on you that we're already undertaking this particular responsibility. So as a start, we are able to take our ops plan and align it to the relevant pillars, and we can break those into subcomponents to give effect now to the actual projects or programs that we undertake. Let me give you an example. If you look at number 1, here on top it says Chief Directorate on the left, the first row, the first column rather. And then row that starts with 1 talks to the Chief Directorate capacity building. Then 1.1 talks to a directorate within capacity building. So as it relates to pillar 1, what we are doing from the National Treasury side in terms of recruitment and selection, this is exactly what we're doing. Monitoring and support on local government minimum competency levels and talent pipeline. Let me just impress on you what that is all about. It's one of our responsibilities within the National Treasury, Office of the Accountant General Capacity Building, to oversee the implementation of the issued regulations in the form of minimum competency levels. I'm responsible for that particular program. The other one is the internship program as implemented at the municipal level, also funded through the Division of Revenue Act Financial Management Grant Allocation. So this, I'm saying, is an implementation plan that has been carved utilizing the ops plan, the operational plan. So how am I contributing to this recruitment and selection? By overseeing the implementation of these two programs, ensuring that whoever comes on board within the municipal space has the minimum higher education qualification, minimum regulated experience, they've signed performance agreements where required, and they have what you call the sector-specific competency levels. That's what the minimum competency levels is all about. And those sector-specific competency levels have been aligned to 2 SAQA qualifications. We can talk about that at a later stage, but they are there on the National Treasury website. On the talent pipeline side, municipalities are required to appoint a minimum of 5 unemployed graduates in accounting, economics, finance, internal auditing, risk management, all the 9 disciplines, and take them through a 3-year program, work rotation plan that has mentorship, coaching, and these interns must also comply with the minimum competency levels so that by the end of year 3, they're actually appointable within the relevant and appropriate positions within municipalities. Why are we doing that? We're wanting to manage the issues of making sure that there's a talent pipeline that the municipality can capitalize on to deal with issues of HR attrition. People go in retirement, people pass on, people go change jobs and so forth, so that we deal with this problem termed capacity. Many a times when the EGSA comes on board and starts asking questions about why things are not done the way they're supposed to be done, municipalities talk about issues of resources. No, we're lacking resources there and there. So we thought perhaps these resources could be qualified in the form of warm bodies. Unemployed graduates, then we take them through that work rotation plan over 3 years and so forth. But these 2 programs, then I'm saying, would fall under Pillar 1. So then in principle, I'm starting to build on my implementation plan. I can also drill down into what that also entails. And what am I saying on point number A, B, and C? Is this linked to the ops plan? Yes, it is linked to the ops plan because I've signed performance agreement that talks to that. What is the frequency of reporting? Every quarter, I issue a report to my principals that's going to be consolidated with the other National Treasury reports. What is the performance information in the form of a report? Many times you get results. If people have gone through the formal training, we want to see that as well. And why are we interested in this, colleagues? Because we are spending just over R500 billion that accrues to municipalities as a financial management grant allocation, and necessarily we have to get those particular things. So if you look into pillar number 2, can you please scroll down, Kusam, on induction, a little bit down. I can't see, no, down, that's up, the opposite way. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just stick to that and then I'll let you know when to move. So this is pillar 2 on induction and onboarding. Are we involved in this particular pillar? Yes, with respect to this particular directorate. I'm monitoring and supporting the MFMA induction program across municipalities. We have an e-learning program. We have a face-to-face MFMA induction program that is meant for relatively new officials. We do know that many times induction never happens, especially within the financial unit or the budget and treasury office for new employees and interns. So I also facilitate that, initiate that with the support of the provincial treasuries. And that is also linked to the ops plan, operational plan. That's why I have those A, B, and C there. Pillar 3, planning and performance management. We also monitor that municipalities, where required, have signed those performance agreements because it's prescribed under the minimum competency levels. And we continuously issue reports for our principals for that particular element. Pillar 4, continued learning and professional development. Yes, we do that as well. Engagement with municipalities and provincial treasuries about public financial management capacity building initiatives and progress in that regard. And through the MFMA joint meetings, through the CFO forums, MMs forums, May forums, we're able to engage in that regard and impart that particular knowledge. And why am I emphasizing this, colleagues? I'm also wanting to say to colleagues that if we work smartly, especially if you are coming from a sector department, you'd actually note that this is not going to be double reporting, but you're actually reporting on the work that you are doing as aligned to those particular pillars. Now, the other elements, as you scroll up now, Kulsam, we have the Chartered Accountants Academy, that also falls under capacity building. I've also codified that. We'll share the slides with you if needs be. There's also what you term Public Financial Management 1. Please scroll up, Kulsam. There's also PFM 2. The differences between one and 2 is that we have 9 disciplines that we are supporting broadly within the National Treasury, and that talks to management accounting, revenue management, expenditure management, asset management, financial accounting, SCM, internal control, enterprise risk management, and internal auditing. So the 2 directorates have shared that particular workload between them. But we are able to codify with respect to how that influences professionalization as issued by the National School of Government and perhaps soon to be ratified by Parliament. Please scroll up, Kulsam. So up, no, that's down. Okay, next slide, maybe. Next slide. Yeah. So what we have here, I think that the better bulk of the discussions were covered under AGSA in terms of internal audit support, the role of internal audit support within the Office of the Accountant General. And colleagues, like I've said, there's collaboration with respect to the work that we do in other disciplines with other entities, such as the AGSA. So AGSA has covered extensively in terms of what internal audit support is all about, or internal audit is all about, the roles of audit committees established in line with the Municipal Structures Act, Section 79, and also MFMA Section 164. And necessarily, we provide the requisite support in that regard to make sure that, Section 166 of the MFMA. So I think AGSA has done justice with respect to that. So what the Internal Audit Support Chief Directorate has done is that they've taken their ops plan and they've also populated that against those particular pillars to give effect to the required implementation plan and the reporting requirements at a later stage. And you'll notice that throughout this particular effort, there's not going to be any duplication in terms of designing a report that's for National Treasury and a report that's necessary for the National School of Government to give effect to reporting requirements here. But it is a case of we're singing from the same hymn book. How do we codify the work that we do as crafted within the ops plan and our performance agreement to give effect to the professionalization framework? And colleagues, I could have done this for all 9 disciplines, but it's just for them to manage time. I've only given colleagues a sample of 2, just capacity building and internal audit support. You could have done that for the other related subjects that I've talked to. And this just to impress on colleagues that, yes, we've been steadfast, we've been on pace with the professionalization of the sector, but it has taken different forms and dynamics. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the other element, and many times colleagues would know that once we start talking about professionalization or maybe talk about the issue of capacity building, if you don't have a buck to fund that, everything falls back to square one. So we have been a little bit lucky from the National Treasury side through our engagements with the donor community, and we're able to mobilize some kitties through the European Union agreements that have been signed with the government of the Republic of South Africa, the New Zealand, the Swiss, and we've been implementing these particular programs to capitalize on the donor community willingness to support on our public financial management and FM capacity drives, such as developing knowledge products for use by practitioners, placement of technical advisors under the EU. For example, we're doing that in the Eastern Cape and Northern Cape. And to ensure that this is structured, just for your benefit, colleagues, let me close this loop. We have drafted what we call provincial support plans, if advisors are placed at provincial treasury level, and we have municipal support plans. That outlines exactly what these technocrats or these advisors ought to do, and there's that peer learning activities that happen between the technical advisors and the people that are employed within both the provinces themselves and municipalities. And we follow up on that continuously. We also have what we call the Swiss PINK program. PINK stands for Procurement, Infrastructure, and Knowledge Management. Procurement, Infrastructure, and Knowledge Management. So this is a Swiss program that's been funded. We're currently at Free State and Mpumalanga and a couple of pilot municipalities to make sure that they're able to implement their procurement programs through the SCM reforms. We're also developing knowledge products and so forth. We also have support of the New Zealand High Commissioner that supports SCM program rollout in selected provinces. So I'm just impressing on you here that to give traction to professionalization, many times you might need additional funding. And I'm saying from where we're seated, we've been able to garner that particular support and we're able to make progress in that regard. Next slide, please. So some of the knowledge products have been posted on the National Treasury website, and colleagues can peruse those at their own leisure. So once knowledge products are developed, we make sure that they are posted on the National Treasury website. We're also developing another knowledge management platform to make sure that all the solutions that have been produced are able to be replicated to other municipalities that were not even pilot benefiting from the initial project implementation as pilots. So they're able to learn from other colleagues through peer learning mechanisms, through interaction of the National Treasury, Provincial Treasury, and the respective recipients in the form of municipalities. And all the knowledge products are placed at the same place. Next slide, please. The same applies to the PFMA knowledge products that are on the National Treasury website, be it guidelines, regulations, instruction notices, and so forth. But like I said, we're busy developing a knowledge management platform where all knowledge products will be assembled, especially the ones that we've developed utilizing the donor kitty so that they're accessible to the other clients, such as municipalities, entities, and the departments. Why are we doing that? To make sure that there's no duplication of effort, to make sure that municipalities do not buy the same service 10 times before it sticks. If they need to understand what's happening under supply chain management reforms, the best practices, they should be able, at the click of a button, get that particular knowledge product. If they need support in terms of interpretation, they can drop an MFMA, an email at the MFMA helpline, mfma@treasury.gov.za, to say, kindly clarify this particular concept. How does it work vis-a-vis these circumstances? And the turnaround time is usually 2 weeks. We're able to be responsive in that regard. And then we track all the responses to make sure that there's uniform interpretation of whatever we have. And colleagues, this is part of professionalization because it gives effect to continuous professional development. It gives effect to continuous improvement in skills management, knowledge management, and the other related products that talk to the broader professionalization framework. Next slide, please. Oh, that's all. Thank you, colleagues, for your time. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sibinda, for this comprehensive presentation. In particular, I've noted the importance of the fact that to make sure that we answer the question of the how are we going to professionalize? It's important to have an implementation plan. So thank you for giving us an example of an implementation plan. And importantly also is the funding, additional funding. And coming from National Treasury, please try to channel some of those donor funding towards all the departments so that we can all ensure that we implement. But that will imply that we have implementation plans that justifies the costing. So thanks a lot for your presentation. We will now move to question and answer session. And ladies and gentlemen, we are requested to also raise your hands and ask verbal questions, but you'll be guided by Ms. Jonita Fennell and Ms. Marisa Labusachni. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Dr. Johnny. Colleagues, before I raise questions, I just wanted to alert you, we have fast-paced presenters today. If you go on to where we are at, you will see you have a mute button, your stop video, the number of participants, and then there's the Q&A. So some of the colleagues have already answered some of the questions. If you open your Q&A, click on that tab, you will see questions that are open and questions that have already been answered. So for those of you who have already answered questions or asked questions, please refer to the answers that was given by some of our presenters today. And if you have any follow-up, please raise your hand or need any further clarifying questions or further engagements, please do so. But there was one question that is still outstanding, and I wanted to give Ms. Faith Nyaka. This is for NSG. In terms of the presentation that you presented, there's a specific question in terms of Section 3 public entities and whether the framework is applicable to Section 3A public entities. And an example like that is your South African Medical Research Council. So let me give you a chance to respond to that, and then I'll move over to our colleagues from the Auditor General's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonita. Yeah, I think in my presentation, I indicated that this framework is applicable to the public administration, and the only definition is currently is in the Constitution of our country, because that public administration is inclusive of your public, your national department, provincial, your local government, state-owned entities, and other organs of state. And I also indicated that we are also working with the Department of Public Enterprises and its shareholders departments that are going to take forward the professionalization of the other professions that are not in this meeting, because all public servants need to be professionalized, and each department has been given a responsibility to make sure that they professionalize the whole public sector. So it also applies to them. And that is why the National Treasury invited them, because they are, especially for them, because they're looking for the finance, supply chain with the AG, and also the issues of the audit function. So they're the ones that are responsible for making sure that there is professionalization in that area. Those that fall outside the professions that we have called, we, as the NSG, we are working with the various entities to organize the webinars as a form of advocacy. Will be a 10 for those that are not here, to make sure that they are also invited for attending these webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nyaka. Then I'm moving over to Mr. Bloom and Ms. Ravat. There's a question around that, or more, let me say a statement first, that, you know, that there should be mechanisms in place to ensure that there's a complete skills transfer, especially when it comes to BAS and LOGAS. So whilst we are focusing on professionalizing the public sector, our ICT systems are not efficiently geared. And taking into consideration that supply chain management is the core of government, but also responsible for most of the collapses in government in terms of spending and reporting. So with the result that processing of journals and unpaid invoices are not always in sync, because the financial systems are not in sync and outdated. So for example, departments report on accrual accounting methods, while government is still in cash accounting methods. So one excess to financial reports is restricted actually to these reporting differences. So I'm not sure between the two of Mr. Bloom and Ms. Rawat, if you could answer that question. Then I have a sense that this question from a Mr. or Ms. Michele and Gershon, maybe you can also just take this one down. I'll get to you. There's one question specifically for you as well, but also just to get a sense from the AG side. So the second question is, due to the change from time to time in accounting standards, IFRS is the abbreviation that is used, and governance, can you please respond to why there cannot be regular training for public personnel in order to align these changes to be incorporated into performance and adjustments needed to ensure that sound and quality financial systems are always produced? So that question, the last question, Gershwin, I'm hoping that you also noted it because I get a sense that it's two-folded, but let me first give Ms. Rawat and Mr. Bloom a chance to respond to those two questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jonita. Yeah, so just in terms of the training, it is not the AG's responsibility to train on IFRS. I don't know if that is actually a response for National Treasury. And just in terms of the question around the systems and the skills transfers, remember, we audit the financial statements as we receive them. The processes that need to take place before and that support the submission of quality financial statements rest with government. We cannot actually make those changes, and we cannot accommodate for weaknesses in those systems. So we need to audit against a framework, which is exactly what we do. And if we find weaknesses around there, we have to report on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Rawat. Mr. Bloom, any comment from your side or added on?
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to add on to that, in terms of the difference in the frameworks and so forth, Ms. Rawat is correct. Treasury is the holder of those frameworks and those accounting frameworks, and the differences between the systems and the systems being able to generate information in compliance to those frameworks. And I think that's also why it's important to have the necessary skill in government. To be able to, while Treasury is trying to catch those systems up, to fill those gaps with people that have the necessary skills to do those necessary conversions. Then just in terms of the second comment, as a professional, there are publicly available updates in terms of IFRS, in terms of CRAP, that either SAICA or the ASB presents in terms of updates to the financial reporting frameworks and so forth. And I've also seen certain municipalities also request the ASB to come and present to them on certain changes or challenges that they're having with the accounting standards. So that is also an avenue that people could explore, actually engaging with those professional bodies like SAICA and the ASB, should the National Treasury perhaps not have that facilitation or skill in place at the moment. Thanks.
Ms. Nyaka, is your hand up in response to the question?
Yes.
If you're closing this out before we move to National
I'm not.
Treasury?
Yeah, I'm not closing. I want to indicate that National Treasury has, do you call it, you work in that section, do you call it SLA or MOU? I think it's something that you need to take up with National Treasury out of that, because the role of the NSG is to ensure that there is professionalization and programs that we need to do, and we're working on partnership with various professional bodies. I think you can try and assist in that, because our platform is accessible to a wider community of public servants. If it's a gap that has been identified, I think we need to take it up internally with National Treasury to see how we can bridge the gap that has been identified by the colleagues in this group. Thank you.
Noted, Ms. Nyaka. Gershon, over to you. I think we touched on the second question, which is your first question in terms of training, but the last question is an interesting one, but I wanted to get your sense. Since DPME is not part of this webinar, and they were actually part of our last webinar that we had on the 4th of May. So there's a question around the process, the fact that we've already concluded our APPs, right? And so the question would be whether we will be allowed to make changes in mid-year. What is your comments? What is your thinking around this matter in terms of, and working closely with DPME? Will it be allowed? Since we, just to make sure that we are on par if we're talking about professionalization. And I guess it's got to do with the way you've explained the how. So over to you, Gershon.
Thank you, colleague. Colleagues, like I've said, the work on professionalization is already inherent in the work that we do. In our contracted work, as shown within the APP and the ops plan and your performance agreements. Perhaps as a start, it's a case of just aligning those to the given pillars, as shown earlier on. I doubt if we're going to have very a robust change with respect to managing that within the APP issues and the performance agreements. It's a case of just aligning as a start. And that will facilitate whether there's room to extend or to open up the system once more to make the minute changes within the actual APPs that have already been contracted upon, or maybe continue with the status quo. So remember, this is the first of its kind in terms of the closer monitoring that is required in this regard. That's why I was recommending that perhaps as a start, let's look at the model that National Treasury has designed that I've just flagged. And I'm assuring you, you need not even cover everything because of the nature of your work. But perhaps the nuanced deliverables will then talk to some of those key issues that have been highlighted by the National School of Government. But perhaps it's also a matter that we can take forward with NSG and DPME, subject to them perhaps assessing how our implementation plans work. So I do not have a full answer for you, but perhaps it's something that we can have a discussion with NSG and perhaps pave the way forward and maybe provide the necessary guidance in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Gersh. Then before I just checking with Kulsum if there are any hands as the host, but before I hand over, I just wanted to check, Ms. Nyaka, there's 2 more questions for you. Whether we have any idea on what are the timelines for professionalization of ICT and HR processes, and if we have an idea of when DPSA will finalize the review of the DDGs and HODs, DGs, Performance Management Development System, SMS and other levels. And then the issue of equity targets in trying to professionalize the public service. More than often than not, appointments are based on equity. So this means going forward, it will be based on merit. So just those 2 clarifying questions, please. Thanks. Over to you, Faith.
Thank you, Janita. The first one, currently, I think the ICT one, we already have a meeting with the DPSA. They are planning a webinar for ICT. I hope that the one for HR will also follow soon. In our meeting, we'll also ask them about when are we planning the one for HR, but I know that in June, we'll be having a webinar with the ICT colleagues, and then we'll be able to provide that information. The issue of the performance management for DGs and DDGs, that document, I think it's on its route to be presented to Cabinet. They've already done that. And the one for other SMS and other levels, I think it's in their plan. It's not yet finalized because they also have a similar thing like what our colleague from Treasury, Mr. Geshin, has presented. They have an implementation plan in terms of what are their key priorities and when will other things be done. But I know that in this financial year, the review of performance management is in the radar. So they didn't put the month, but it's in this financial year. In their webinar, I think we can probe and ask more questions as we attend the webinar that will be called by the DPSA. The second part of the question is the issue of equity targets versus competency. I think after 29 years, the public sector is where it is because of the issue of trying to push equity. There should be a balance, and where there are other occupations where I think there is scarcity, like in your built environment, there's scarcity in terms of females taking up those occupations, and the CBE is having plans to make sure that they go out there from school level to recruit learners to take those subjects, which means in our occupations, like when we are with Treasury, it is the responsibility of Treasury now to start assessing if we do have enough people in supply chain, females and males and so forth, so that in their plan for candidacy and also for recruitment and bringing more learners into the field, they need also to look at those things. But I think that we need to push. We are not saying equity is not critical, but in technical fields where we've got no expertise, I don't think we are going to compromise. I don't think that we are going to compromise and appoint people who lack the technical skills that are required, because we have been criticized by the public sector. Gone are those days for, for looking at the equity. I think we have passed that stage of whatever issues to make sure that we want to transform. We need to make sure that as females, if there's a shortage, we need to study in those areas, because we are not delivering good service because of lack of capacity and skills. It's about time. I think the people in HR will have to answer how they're going to balance equity. But for us who are pushing for meritocracy, it's not going to be more about whether the gender. It's going to be about the competence and the skill that is required. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. Before we move over to see, we've got 3 attendees who raised their hands. We'll cross over to them now. But Jeffrey, your hand is up. Is there, you wanted to comment before we move over to the 3 attendees and addressing those issues?
Yes, colleague Junetta, thank you. Maybe let me do this as well. I just need to add on some of the things that, and good morning, colleagues, to everyone, what my colleague Geshin has added, maybe also to impress, and I'm also taking advantage of the CFOs that are here. The work that has actually been done, as Geshin said, it's ongoing. We're not starting from scratch. Through the from 2008 to 2010, National Treasury did conduct actually a research in trying to establish what are the root causes, for poor financial management in the public sector, continuous, audit findings, negative audit findings, irregular expenditure, and so forth. We used the intelligence, it showed that, there are, or currently by then, lack of, relevant education solutions, and the work that we did with the NHG on some of the short learning programs, the working with the sitters, like your facet sitter in terms of the development of the relevant qualifications, working with the tutor on the supply chain management through the learnerships that we've actually rolled out. That has been actually a contribution towards the professionalization. But key to that is that we use the intelligence to develop the competency framework for financial management for all the 9 disciplines, including the technical competency dictionaries. We take that work forward. And CFOs that are here in 2014, between 2012 and 2014, we developed the generic functional structure for the office of the CFOs, just to define what we mean by public finance management, consisting of the 9 disciplines, including internal audit and risk management. That work outline was there, and a circular was issued to that effect to all the CFOs to implement, and most of the CFOs have been working on that one. We use the intelligence from the competency framework also to develop the standardized job descriptions with the DPSA, but that work was done, I think, a few years ago. There is a need, of course, to review, the work output, making sure in terms of the latest development, in terms of the reforms, everything's aligned. And also the issue of inconsistencies in terms of the requirements, qualifications. Some say NQF level 5, NQF level 6. I think we'll need to have a joint collaboration with the DPSA in that regard. We have also, colleagues, now developed, taking the competency framework, and I had Faith earlier on in the morning when she was presenting, talking about the competency assessment. We have, through the donor funded, the EU and others, developed the competency assessment, statements that have been incorporated into the toolkit, which you call it I Develop. It will be demonstrated at some point in time to assess, for the continuous assessment of the competences of the practitioners in the finance, fraternity, including the internal audit and risk management. And also for noting that what we want to impress on this work, National Treasury cannot do that on our own. What we've actually, from capacity building, think of doing in terms of the approach is we are in a process of trying to establish the PFM Capacity Building Forum. That will be the National Treasury working with the departments or also CFOs to nominate people, per discipline. When we're looking at the education qualification short courses, are they relevant? The input must also come from the CFOs, office as well, to nominate, and also on some of the structures that we're going to do. So we will communicate with the CFOs at the proper platform to get nominations, so that when we say professionalization, it's not just National Treasury led, but everybody is part of the game change moving forward. Lastly, it is important, colleagues, that most of the CFOs who just conducted the CFOs assessment that was based on the cabinet, question that was raised about 2 years back. We work with the DPSA on that assessment, and thanks to the CFOs on national and provincial, who have actually responded to the questionnaire. But it demonstrated that, in terms of the professionalization, CFOs, internal audit, chief risk officers, and on individual level have actually made sure that they belong to some of the professional bodies, existing professional bodies, although it is not actually made a regulation or mandatory. And I think for us moving forward, we need to make sure that we regulate, the membership to a professional body in line with the competences and standards. Thank you. That's just what my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
How do I exit here?
Okay, can you lower your hand as well, Jeffrey? Otherwise, I'm seeing double screens here. Thank you. Okay, we've got 3 attendees. In this order, please, you can open your mic and then ask your questions. So I've got, according to the list, I've got Tracy Liner, Debofo Moromane, and Nico Magoleng. And then I've got Mr. or Miss, okay, Miss Ndivo, I see you took your hand away again. So let us take it in that order. Okay, Mr., Miss, Matsi, in that order. So I've got Tracy, you removed, are you still back on? Okay, so in that order, please. Thank you.
Are they able to unmute?
Tracy, you are muted. Okay, you can talk. I can see you unmuted. Go ahead, Tracy.
Apologies, I think my hand was raised. But I have made a comment just with regards to internship programs. I think in terms of the framework, most of it is kind of focused only in pillar 1 where it is. I think with regards to even National Treasury's implementation framework, I think even with the CA program, they actually stopped at pillar 5. And I think that is kind of one of the issues within government in terms of just developing a progression. Because what happens is with these internship programs or with these training programs, what's happening is once people have completed their training, there isn't actually a succession plan. So just in terms of, it's more of a note than a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, and noted. Teboho and then Nico in that order. You can unmute Teboho.
Hi, Juanita. I did not raise my hand. I don't know if it looks as if I raised my hand. It must have happened in error.
Oh, okay,
Thank you.
because your hand is live and big here by us, but thank you.
Okay.
Nico, over to you.
No, thank you very much, colleagues. I just want to find out, because I saw quite a number of presentations, in particular the one that was made by National Treasury. I saw there were pillars that were presented, which amongst others included, I think it's pillar number 2 and 3, which talks to education and I think even job creation, if I'm not mistaken. I've noted that I've taken note of the comments that are there, which include, incorporation of systems that are being used in government. I just want to check, in terms of Treasury, what are the plans in making sure that the systems that we are using, in particular, a basic accounting system, Logis, which currently are the ones that are more vital to what we in both province and national. What are the plans to incorporate such systems even in municipalities and public entities? Because the latter speaker just made mention of internship. There are people who are really disadvantaged, especially people who are in public entities as well as the municipalities, where there is a need. Whenever there is an advert that is being made out in the provincial and national, there is always that need, especially in finance, where they say you need to have basic accounting system and maybe Logis as well for supply chain. What are the plans in terms of, ensuring that these people also take advantage of these opportunities? Because then it means it limits them only to local and public entities. Whereas maybe if we incorporate, especially I've seen now in local municipalities, there is M-Score that has been introduced. Maybe also centralizing these systems also to those institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeffrey and Gershon, any response based on the comment made by our colleague just now?
Thank you, colleague. I think this is a very difficult one, because I've not been privy to the future plans and the IFMS development, Integrated Financial Management Systems development. But perhaps if we look into the other related developments under DPSA, Single Public Service Bill, perhaps into the future we could go towards that particular envisaged destination in terms of making sure that we have a seamless system that takes care of the needs of the 3 spheres of government. But I do not want to talk much about that. Maybe we can just leave it at the question for clarification and perhaps flag that with the relevant chief directorate within the Office of the Accountant General, perhaps to give us some indication in that regard. Jeff, do you want to add something there, maybe without putting you on the spot?
Yeah, Gesh, if I may, through you, Junita, I've noted that, let's note it as not just as a question, but as something worth noting. But what I know that the Treasury, particularly the financial management systems, have always been conducting, the trainings on logis, BES, etc. But that was actually on a need based, basis. So if a client or department or municipality require that, but we'll communicate those as Geshen has guided through the relevant, chief directorate. But I know that there are trainings that can be conducted if any do arise. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Any further clarification questions, colleagues? There's 329 of you in this meeting today. This is your chance to seek any clarification questions or follow up, or where things are unclear. Please feel free to raise your hand. I don't see anything on the Q&A chats anymore, so I'm assuming that's clear. We are now giving you an opportunity to ask questions and raise your voice. Going once, going twice. Panelist, not attendee. Nico? You can go ahead, Nico.
No, thanks. I want to emphasize on this one that I've just recently asked. As the go maybe also to the relevant people. I'm saying this because currently looking at the unemployment, especially people who are in this, that's those institutions that I've just made mention of, the two entity and entity and as well as municipality, they get disadvantaged. There are really no many opportunities for them in those spheres, simply because there is this one who has been occupying the position and of course is locally and cannot move, or even is far from retiring. Now, when you come to provincial and national, there's always, DPSA is always advertising many positions where there is also finance include. But the only disadvantage to these ones is because they don't have these particular systems that I've talked about too. Maybe as treasury, as you go and engage the relevant people, you may need to, come up with a way in, even if it means going to those local municipalities as well as the entities, just introduce the system. So not necessarily having them to use it, but making them aware of how it's being used so that they can also, get those opportunities and take advantage of them, especially the youth, given the current circumstances, situations of unemployment. Thank you. That is just a comment and also a recommendation to say, as you go back and do that, please also take, if it's possible, or introduce such trainings to those so that they can also take advantage of this DPSA advert. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nico. You missed it by the split second. So I stopped at twice. Should I start again? Okay, we're going once, going twice, going thrice. No further questions, no Q&A. Over to you, Program Director, Dr. Johnny. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Jonita and colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll agree with me that this has been quite comprehensive, a lot of information, but also reassuring as far as implementation is concerned. The Minister of Public Service Administration indicated that the framework will be implementable when guided by indicators like norms and standards. So what we've been talking about, basically, even the question that has been coming up from Nico, indicates that there's a need to ensure that we have got proper norms and standards that would guide. I don't know whether there will be in the form of regulations changed or in the form of policies that are implemented, but all that will emerge as we start seeing departments like National Treasury indicating clearly their kind of plan regarding their units that in the National Treasury. But also these norms and standards would assist with the auditing process, because we are supposed to be audited on this as the years go by. But more importantly, for Auditor General Office also, you can't get away from the fact that it's important also for you to come up with a plan on how you professionalize the auditors, how you make it possible for them to be to exist in the public sector and grow their careers also. The role of auditing is quite critical and important, as we've seen with the presentation, and how it is also reflected in the framework. I like what Mr. Adil Blow said earlier. He said that auditing is not just about compliance. And that's very critical, colleagues, because quite often people think that it's all about fear of something, fear of what we are measured on, and then just simply comply without realizing that it should actually add to the importance of service delivery. I've just seen a headline on News 24 that says KZN Human Settlement underspent 360 million on housing, but overspent by 24 million on advertisements and laptops. It's quite a telling aspect here, because how do you underspend, if this is true, by the way, because the media report, but how do you underspend on housing as KZN when we know that the province has got serious backlog, also that was exacerbated or worsened by the floods in the recent times. So these are some of the indicators that some people sometimes fail to go into projects of this nature in order to avoid being having adverse findings from the auditors. So auditing should not be about compliance, but should be about ensuring that we have proper service delivery. So thanks a lot for your contribution, your participation. Let me also thank all the presenters. I'll not mention their names again. Let me just add by thanking Mr. Hlongwane also for adding his information there, and also to thank Marisa and Juanita for dealing with the questions. More importantly, I'd like to thank the organizers of this, Kulsam and Christopher Chokwe, who are behind the scenes ensuring that this happens, including those others that I've not even seen, but who are playing an important role on this. But importantly, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, let me thank people who attended this session, members of the public, public servants in the various departments from provinces and national setups. Thanks for attending, but remember the story of a churchgoer who thinks the message is for the enemy. This message was for you, and please spread it further and play a particular role also. That's quite important. Thanks a lot. We will have other webinars of this nature with other organizations, departments, and in order to ensure that in the end, we implement this framework on professionalization of the public service. Thank you very much. Bye. Let me ask all the presenters actually to switch on your cameras, because I think Christopher and Kulsam may want to take a selfie of all the people who participated in this.
Must remain. Yeah.
Yes. Please make all put on your cameras. I couldn't hear that, Faith. Put on
The presenters
your cameras.
must remain so that we can take the selfie.
Selfie, yes. It's called virtual selfie. I hope we're ready now. Let's take it.
Who's taking?
I'm not
Marisa,
sure
are
whether
you there?
I made a screen print, yes.
Christopher
Is that
and
your selfie,
Kulsam,
Marisa? That one? No.
Christopher and Kulsam could give us a thumbs up if we are done.
Marisa, you need to do the video. Chris, you must indicate if you are done.
Hi, Sister. Not all of you did the camera, put the camera on. I'm still waiting.
I think Nhlanhla and Jeff and Rufus, they must just log out. Oh, Jeff spoke. Oh, we can't. Okay, Tata, please do the video. If you want to take a picture, please, because yeah. Okay, Chris. Yeah, yeah. It's taking long.
Are you done, Chris?
Yes, I'm done. I'm done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Colleagues
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
from the National Treasury and colleagues from AGSA, thank you so much. I hope that we'll have other engagement of this nature to take this work forward.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.